Today we're going to tell you what I'm calling a Cosmopolitan quill, and it's kind of a bullet quill fly. Rather than using a regular dabbing collar, we're going to actually use some soft hackle on it. And what we're going to use today is going to be this beautiful silver and black badger. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and start our thread just here behind the bead. I'm just going to use a shear 14-aught in a black. I'm just going to take that down a little ways and come back in with my scissors, and I'll just trim out that waist piece right there. From here, I'm going to just start working a little bit on a taper. This is going to be a tapered fly, but not an excessively tapered fly. But it is it's a quill body fly, so we'll get to do some quill work here in a bit, which is always an area that can go really sideways really quickly. The very first material we're going to tie on is I'm going to reach down here and grab a piece of Coke de Leon. This is an olive color. The reason we're going olive is we're actually going to go golden olive for the body of the abdomen of the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick myself out a nice little bunch of these fibers from this Coke de Leon, and once I have them so they're close to the same length, I'll just pinch them, and then I will work on ripping them right off of there. So with those off, I can take a look at measurement, and I want this a little bit longer than the shank of the hook. This one is going to bend right down around the bend of the hook there, so it's going to be on an almost straight down trajectory here, kind of like that. That's a little bit more than what I want, and so the nice thing is I can grab hold of that bunch here on this side, because I haven't completely tied it in yet, and I can make some length adjustments on it to where we get it where we want it, which is that's much better for me. So we'll go ahead, and I'm going to lock those down a little bit better, and then I'm going to work my way back up towards the eye of the hook. And you'll note I'm keeping the balance of that Coke de Leon in place just to help us get that taper built, using some of the materials. We're going to throw it away anyway, may as well make use of it. Then we'll just come on in here with our scissors, and we'll go ahead and clip that off. So there we have it. We've got that kind of locked into place. So the next thing I'm going to tie in, and it's going to be a second before I tie it in, and hopefully I won't do a lot of talking in between, is I'm going to use some of this hand-stripped Polish quill. Great material. And this particular fly, we use the olive tail. We're going to actually use a golden olive for our quill body on this particular fly. And so what I like to do when I'm using quills, because I just am not lucky when it comes to quill. I break it most of the time. So what I do is I'll take one of the quills out. So this is what they'll look like. And I'm just going to put this in my mouth while I work on the taper a little bit. And that'll help get this a little bit moist. So we've got our thread pulled down right where that tail is, and then I built up a tiny bit more of a taper. Hopefully you can see that. I've got my thread spinning on purpose, counterclockwise, because we're now going to take our quill and tie it in. And I like to tie it in. You'll notice there's an edge that is lighter and an edge that is darker. I like my darker edge pointed more towards the bottom of the fly. So that's going to kind of put that in there at a little bit of an angle. And then we'll just go ahead and take a few wraps to secure that. And of course our quill body is going to start right at the very end of the abdomen here. So we're going to need to lock this guy down all the way through down to the back. And what I want to be really careful here, not to take too tight of turns. Your thread will cut right exactly through that piece of quill material, and then it will break off. It's never happened to me before, but I've seen other people. Actually, it happens to me just about every time I use it. So all I'm doing here is making a couple more passes up and down, working on kind of, making a little bit of a taper up here until we get up to the bead. I'm pretty satisfied with that, so I'm just going to make one last final pass here. I'll take that right up to the bead, and from there I'm going to go ahead and whip finish that. Okay, so we're going to leave our thread attached. I've just thrown the whip finish in because it makes it easier for me anyway as a tire to use my bobbin cradle to keep the thread from spreading around too much. So there I've got my thread in its cradle. I'm going to reach down and find myself a pair of hackle pliers, because I'm going to need every last centimeter of this quill. By the way, that's why it sat in my mouth for a moment, is these quills are very, very delicate. So as we're making these turns, it took me a long time to get patient enough. The reward was always worth it. Learning, you wouldn't think this would take much learning, but there is, in terms of control, a huge art form, and I am a novice and a half. You need to continue to have enough tension on your quill here that it's not going to come unwound, the work you've done. But it's also an incredibly brittle material. You're going to see one coming around right there that I just watched. I don't know how this is still holding on. I'm kind of impressed by it. But they're so delicate. You can't pull too hard. And if you're too soft, it'll just come unwound. And I'm going to go ahead and tie this up with that defect in it. I think it's kind of useful to show, number one, how delicate these fibers are, but also show what can happen when you're tying with it. So I'm going to just take a few thread wraps here behind my hackle pliers, which means I'm tying over the top of that quill that we just tied in. And then I'm going to pull everything a little bit backwards, tie up by the bead. Now we have some thread wraps in front of and behind that piece. So I'll go ahead and remove my hackle plier at that point, and I'm going to come in and we'll just trim up the butt here. So we put a really light coat of UV. Actually, I'm using a loon thin, and I used a sewing needle to just get it nice and spread out over the quill itself there. And then we're just finishing cooking it here with our UV ray, our UV light. Probably one of the reasons I didn't, go over the top in tying this quill down. I did. It'll come unwrapped and it'll break, just like I said. But I also knew ahead of time that I was going to coat this thing in UV ray or UV finish. So that really makes this a shell, which is what we're looking for here. So most commonly you would be working with a tip end of a feather. Most of us are used to that. You know, that's what I mean by tip end, is the end of the feather at the opposite end of the skin. In this case, because I've been able to use this feather for multiple flies, I don't have a tip. I did that on the first one, but I don't anymore, which is fine for this particular step. So what we're going to do is, I've got myself a pair of hackle pliers. I'm going to try to attach this piece of feather here with my hackle pliers as close to the very center of that tip as I possibly can. And I'm going to just wet my fingers, and after I wet my fingers, we're just going to pull this back, pulling on this material. And I'm really gonna, I really want this drenched down. I'm perfectly fine with this sticking back a whole lot. So that's what we've kind of got right there, is we've got a lot of that slicked back. We've got a hackle plier. I'm gonna let loose with my hackle plier at this point. And now I've got myself a pretty decent section where I can actually tie this material onto the fly here with that kind of triangle there. So we're going to just, you know, I'm going to take one loose wrap here, fairly loose. I want to capture the shaft of that feather, but I also want my very first turn to be as close to where this quill body is as possible. So then we're going to secure that kind of in place. I'm going to go ahead and trim out this tiny little bit of extra. Most certainly is not needed. So once I've kind of trimmed those out, those butt ends out a little bit, just take a few more wraps here with my thread just to clean some of that up. And that's really it. I am going to throw a half hitch in here because we're going to do a little bit of work with a vice rotation. So I'm just going to actually do this one by finger rather than grabbing my whip finish tool because I'm feeling really lazy today. So our last point, and this is where we're going to do a soft hackle using this badger, much smaller than a grizzly, trust me. So I've got a hold of it with my hackle plier. That just allows me to kind of hold that up straight up. And I'm going to continually just kind of lick my fingers and then come back and stroke those fibers backwards as we start to take winding individual wraps up the shank of this hook. And I'm going to do that on every turn. I'm going to pull everything back again and make myself another turn. We'll pull everything back again. We'll make ourselves another turn. I think maybe this one and one more after this one is the most that we'll be shooting for here. But again, notice how after each one I'm stroking back, and that not only strokes the ones that are on the stem here, but the ones that you've already got in place. It helps them lay backwards, so the stem will actually help that look a little bit more, well, not a little bit more, will look more collar-like when we're finished. Okay, so I am done there. My trick now is I really want to be able to tie the balance of this hackle off without trapping too many fibers. And so I'll actually move this around quite a bit as I do that. There, you can always trim it too, and I'm sure I'll have some trimming to do. And then I'm going to take 2 or 3 wraps towards the bead on the bead side, and then I'm going to let this loose from my hackle plier, and I'm doing that for a very particular reason, and that is now I can pull this extra piece of hackle forward and have a pretty good idea of where the stem is, because that's where I want the cut to be, and sometimes that stem can be hard to find. and that just makes it a little bit easier. So that's kind of what we're left with here. If you would like, you're welcome to do what I'm doing here, which is kind of stroking some of those back. I don't want a huge collar on this by any means, so I'm not going to just keep winding thread on as much as I can. But what I am going to do is I'm going to grab for the thing that signifies the end, and nothing does that better than a whip finisher. So we're going to just throw a 4 or 5 turn whip finish on here, pulling my thread more towards away from the eye of the hook. Will be helpful sometimes. So there you have it, the Cosmo Quill. Beautiful pattern. We've got the olive and the golden olive going on the quill, and then we've dressed her up with that badger hackle, and you can see how wonderful of a pattern that that badger provides. You know, you've got the black in the center, and everything moving out is silver. Tungsten bead, TroutFly. Give it a shot.